A24 just announced a $75 million research partnership with an AI company, DeepMind. A24, the studio behind Hereditary, Midsummer, Everything Everywhere All at Once. The studio that built an entire reputation on making films that feel real, in a way blockbusters don't. Films that use horror not as a spectacle, but as a vehicle to explore concepts that are hard to sit with. Grief, loss of control, shaken belief, a creeping sense that something is wrong, but you just can't put your finger on what. A studio famous for prioritizing creativity and authenticity just signed a deal to replace authentic creators with AI. And you know what's crazy? We've been accepting that kind of trade for decades. Across food, fashion, film, and our own faces. We just didn't realize it. A24 consistently took on films that couldn't get financial support elsewhere. Films that weren't seen as bankable, and made them matter. That reputation wasn't built on pre-established legacy or to become a recognizable brand. It was built on a specific, sustained commitment to human creativity. Creativity was the point. And now that studio has signed a multi-million-dollar deal with the technology that most threatens the artists who made those films possible. Today, we're talking about something you've seen before, but maybe you couldn't name. There is a consistent pattern running underneath all of this. One that shows up in your food, in creative industries, in how beauty standards work, and in what you actually own when you pay for digital media. The pattern is always the same. Something people genuinely value gets replaced with a cheaper, more scalable substitute. The substitute gets distributed widely enough that it becomes what people expect. And then someone profits from the gap between what people believe they're getting and what they're actually receiving. The A24 deal didn't start this pattern, it just made it visible in one of the last places we expected. I want to get there through something completely unexpected. The fact that almost nobody alive has ever actually tasted vanilla. But before we get started, hi! My name's EC, and I like to do deep dives into the ins and outs of what makes our world tick. I love to explore all the contextual threads that make our world ours. If that kind of conversation interests you, subscribe. You'll get to support a small creator like me. So stay with me here. Vanilla is one of the most expensive spices in the world. Yes, vanilla. The most common spice, the most common flavor, the most common scent, to the degree that there are memes about vanilla being in everything. But the real version, the vanilla orchid, is hand-pollinated, and the pods are slow cured to become a spice. The flower and the process to transform it into a spice is so costly and so difficult to produce at scale that mass-market food companies stopped using it decades ago. What we grew up calling vanilla flavor is a synthesized chemical, vanillin, designed to copy what takes 9 months to produce from vanilla bean pods, based on what scientists could chemically replicate from the pod, rather than us having the real thing. Same story with truffle. The truffle oil on every upscale restaurant menu, it's not truffle. It's a synthetic compound. 2,4-dithiapentane. Dissolved in a neutral oil. Even high-end restaurants use it. Because real truffle is so perishable and so expensive that the economics of serving it at scale simply don't work. Wasabi is the same thing. If you've never eaten wasabi in Japan, then you've never had wasabi. What you've had your entire life is horseradish and green food coloring. Real wasabi is a root that oxidizes within 15 minutes of being grated, which makes it functionally impossible to export. So a substitute became the standard, and most people have no reference point for the original. And cashmere, that sweater with the 100% cashmere label? Nope. True cashmere requires a slow, specific, and laborious production process that most brands have stopped bothering to do. Studies have found mislabeling in cashmere products across all price points, from the $300 to the $3,000 sweater you've fought with yourself about buying. Self-care, right?
But is it, though?
From fast fashion to luxury, brands learned the average consumer couldn't tell the difference. So they stopped making an effort. Here's what's weird, though, about all of this. None of us feel cheated. We love vanilla, ice cream, scents, candles, lattes. We feel fancy when we order the truffle fries. The synthetic version is so normalized, and in some cases, so thoroughly optimized that it replaced the original without most of us noticing. And when you've only ever had synthetic truffle oil, not real truffle, you don't experience yourself as missing out. You think you love truffle. What happened with vanilla didn't stay in the food industry. And the same logic is underneath the A24 deal, the AIification of Etsy, what you actually own when you pay for a streaming subscription, and what you see in your front camera when you snap a selfie for Instagram. There's a concept for this. It's called a simulacrum. Many an incredible YouTuber have explored this concept. Case in point. There's even a video game called Simulacra that uses the concept as a core mystery of the gameplay. Simulacrum is a copy of something where there was never an original to begin with. Not a fake of a real thing, like a copy of a designer bag. A representation so dominant that it becomes the standard, and the original disappears behind it. The idea actually goes all the way back to Plato, who explored this in his theory of forms, and most famously in his allegory of the cave, where shadows on the wall are simulacra. The most relevant to today's topic is his discussion about the statues of gods. The statue isn't a god, but over time, people pray to the statue, as if they were speaking to the god. That the representation becomes more real in its effect on the populace than the god it represents. It's why doing certain things in front of a church or inside of a church, or in front of statues of gods, or in cemeteries, or on holy ground, are seen as 10 times as worse than almost anywhere else, even if you're not a believer of that religion. This theory was expanded by Guy Debord in his Society of the Spectacle from 1964 and Jean Baudrillard in his Simulacre et Simulation in 1981. It's a more modernized exploration of the concept in the age of media and how that directs and affects cultural norms. The pattern all of these thinkers identified that across the globe, societies fixate on the representation of a thing until that thing has a life of its own and can be elevated above what the copy was copying has existed since ancient times. But how does this tie back to A24? What made A24 films feel like an A24 film wasn't just the A24 logo plastered across the screen. It was a result of dozens or hundreds of skilled people, directors, cinematographers, composers, production designers, PAs, set designers, costumers, actors, making thousands of creative decisions, utilizing years of practice. You can identify an A24 film within the first few minutes. The pacing, the color grading, the willingness to explore uncomfortable topics in a way that feels artful. Those are authenticity signals, and they feel real because they came from a real craft. Now, there are systems designed to replicate those signals without the craft, the decisions, or the humans behind them. Question is, if the audience can't tell the difference, does it matter? I think it does. But the uproar caused by the A24 news, it forces us to ask when we stopped being able to tell, and whether we already prefer the substitute in more places than we'd like to admit. So that's the pattern in food and in philosophy. But when the same substitution logic moves into creative industries, what's being replaced isn't a flavor or a luxury good. It's a livelihood, and in some cases, a person or genre of craft entirely. The puppetry world is a version of the same story. Puppeteers represent a craft that predates Hollywood by centuries. Jim Henson was able to build a home for it in film, but outside of that foothold, the field is quietly disappearing. Not because the artistry is gone, but because the financial infrastructure to support it has dried up. And when AI can generate a character that looks expressive and alive, there's even less economic incentive to employ a master of a craft that takes decades to perfect. There's already a fully AI-generated actress. Her name is Tilly Norwood, who was launched in 2025 and is being cast in projects. She can't negotiate a contract, turn down a role, or set limits on how her image is used because she isn't a person. She's a service. And there's a real person with real talents who didn't get the role because they can't compete with code that doesn't sleep, doesn't have needs, and doesn't require a contract. Tilly Norwood can be made to do anything. Think about that for a second. That implies a lot, and it's very concerning. Val Kilmer passed away in 2025 as well. And with current technology, studios can now bring his likeness back indefinitely with no agreement from him about what his image does or says on screen as time passes. His estate and his daughter agreed to an AI representation of him in a film he was already in contract to star in, called As Deep as the Grave. But he didn't agree to be represented by AI. He agreed to be in the film as a living person when he was alive. The AI of Val Kilmer can be made to do anything. There are no limits established by his own choices, and there are no proceeds going to him directly. They're going to his estate and his estate's beneficiaries. Meanwhile, on Etsy, a platform specifically built so independent makers could sell directly to buyers, AI-generated art has flooded the marketplace. Buyers who came looking for handmade work are purchasing generated images without knowing it, because the product looks like what they were searching for. The signal of handmade craft is being replicated without the craft behind it. And then there's the question of what you actually own when you buy digital media. When you purchase a film on a streaming platform, you don't own it. You own a license to watch it, one that disappears if you stop paying, or if the platform shuts down, or if they choose to remove the title. Gaming is the same. The hard copy comes with a code on paper. The disc installs a license key, and the game itself lives on servers you have no access to. GTA 6. Yes, that GTA 6. It is finally supposed to come out. It only took so much for that to happen, but it's priced at $80 for a game. $80 with limited content at launch. And there are reports of a hard copy that contain no actual disc, just a case with a printed code, so that buyers don't feel cheated by not having a physical item in their hands. The concept of a physical object became a simulacrum of ownership. You're holding a box that represents having something you don't actually have. The economic logic is obvious. Subscription and licensing models generate more recurring revenue than one-time sales. The substitution process doesn't end at industries. It also runs through how we're taught to see our own bodies. Beauty standards have always been community constructed. What's different now is the scale and the speed. Algorithmic feeds create echo chambers that are significantly larger and more international than any local community has ever been. Meaning a very narrow beauty ideal can feel like universal consensus when it's actually just a well-distributed product. We're watching it in real time right now. There's active public concern about Ariana Grande's appearance on her recent tour. The ideal she appears to be chasing is also a simulacrum. It was itself constructed, promoted, profited from, and then discarded in favor of a new one. The Kate Moss heroin chic style of the 90s catwalk has returned with a vengeance, and we're seeing it show up on many more celebrities than just her. The body type that was aspirational a few years ago, the more voluptuous Kim K body of the 2010s and early 2020s, was manufactured and appropriated from Black women. As society has shifted towards the conservative, the ideal appearance has changed with it. One that is significantly more white, slim, and childlike. And the cycle has real-world physical consequences. Surgical procedures, EDs, GLP-1 medications being used outside of medical need, because the aesthetic pressure is that extreme. You can track the same logic in the creator economy. There's a pattern of influencers shooting content inside of luxury stores without buying anything, sourcing replica designer bags from Etsy, and building an entire aspirational identity around a lifestyle they're constructing rather than living. The aspiration is the product, and that would be fine if it wasn't propagating a sense that there are more people who have more access to wealth, and that it is a personal flaw rather than a systemic one that the audience is able to see. Brooke Monk, a massive influencer, went viral again because she removed her makeup on camera next to her boyfriend. And people reacted like she'd harmed them. Not because she looked different, but the gap between the projected ideal of her by her audience and what she actually looks like inflicted. The audience had subscribed to the simulacrum they had projected onto her and was briefly confronted by the person behind it. But that's how normalization works. It moves underneath your awareness. I want to end with a piece of fiction, because sometimes the clearest way to see a pattern is to watch someone enact it at the most personal skill possible. And Obsession does exactly that. Obsession is a film that came out in May of this year, and it's taken the world by storm. For an indie film with a budget under $1 million, it was not expected to break boundaries financially, but it exploded. It's made $371 million at the box office so far, and it is still in theaters. The story follows Bear, a self-conscious young man who becomes obsessed with his coworker Nikki. Bear becomes so fixated on Nikki that he uses a supernatural force to make her want him. What the movie is actually depicting is deeply sinister. Bear doesn't want Nikki. He wants the projection of Nikki that lives in his own head, a version built from his desires, fears, and the cultural templates he's absorbed about what an ideal woman looks and acts like. He creates a simulacrum of her and forces her to match it, despite her total lack of consent and active attempts to break free from the curse he's placed on her. And then, surprise, surprise, he's miserable. Oh no. Because the projection doesn't behave like a person, Wish Nikki only cares about Bear. She has no morals, no boundaries, no limit to what she will do to ensure she is what she has been wished to be. There is nothing else to her, and you cannot have a real connection with someone or something that has no interiority. The film is very deliberate about that. Real Nikki has no agency over what's happening to her. Only Wish Nikki does, and Wish Nikki is entirely Bear's construction. He can't even bring himself to free her when Wish Nikki terrifies him, because her obsessed with him, the simulacra of her, is preferable to her as a real person. This is exactly what capitalism does with desire at a larger scale. It takes something people genuinely value, builds a cheaper and more controllable version of it, distributes that version widely enough that it becomes the reference point, and then profits from everyone chasing after something that was never real to begin with. Patrick Bateman in American Psycho is the endpoint of this. He has everything the American culture, has told him was the ideal. The wealth, the status, the right restaurants, the perfect business cards. His life is a flawlessly executed simulacrum, and it's completely hollow because of it.
There is an idea of a Patrick Bateman, some kind of abstraction, but there is no real me, only an entity, something illusory. And though I can hide my cold gaze, and you can shake my hand and feel flesh gripping yours, and maybe you can even sense our lifestyles are probably comparable, I simply am not there.
The violence is the only thing that breaks through the performance and makes him feel real. What's alarming is a significant portion of the audience responds to him aspirationally. They miss the point because the signals of success are so legible. Even in a cautionary tale, that's how powerful the simulacrum of luxury is. You can build a film designed to critique it, and people will still just want to be it. Just like those influencers and their replica luxury bags. So let's connect all of this. We've talked about a couple of different things. Synthetic vanilla stands in for spice most people have never tasted. Truffle oil on menus have never seen a real truffle. A studio built on human creativity, partnering with something designed to replace it, actors brought back digitally after death, or created entirely from code with no consent for what they'll be made to do in the future. Handmade marketplaces filling up with generated images, streaming libraries full of content you've paid for but you don't own, beauty cycles that engineer an ideal, profit from it, and discard it before anyone catches their breath or can even begin to keep up. Every single one of these works exactly the same way. Something people genuinely value gets replaced with a scalable substitute. The substitute gets normalized until it becomes the reference point, and then someone profits from the gap between what people believe they're getting and what they're actually receiving. Sometimes the substitute does genuinely serve people who couldn't access the original. All of us, for example, because artificial vanilla flavor made vanilla affordable. It never would have been otherwise. Digital media is more accessible than physical. There aren't, I guess, only negatives to synthetic luxuries. But the question is, what happens when the substitute becomes so dominant that we lose the ability to recognize the value of the original? When you've only ever had truffle oil, you think you love truffle. You've never actually had a truffle. And if someone puts the real thing in front of you, you might not even recognize it as better. You might think it's awful. The same risk applies to how we see creativity, beauty, and even genuine human connection when we've spent long enough with an optimized substitute. A24 built its reputation on the real thing. Whether it can hold that while partnering with something designed to replicate it is an open question, one that I think we all have. But is it the right question? Because it's not just about A24. It's also about all these other spaces where we've accepted synthetic versions of things or replaced versions of real things and thought that was good enough. At some point, the artificial falls apart. And when it does, you have to decide, do you really want the real thing? Or are you going to reach for another substitute? Let me know in the comments which synthetic luxury surprised you the most. Have you ever had real vanilla? How do you feel about the A24 deal? What do you think this might mean for creativity? Not just in film, but on a wider scale. I know that A24 is far from the only creative studio, person, or concept that has partnered with AI. There are plenty of artists who have partnered with AI companies. Everyone from Diplo to Charlie Puth. But up until now, a full studio production with all of the hundreds and sometimes even thousands of employees that are involved and depend on those studios for their livelihoods, for their dreams and their goals, that is new. What do you think about it? And if this type of conversation is something you're looking for, don't forget to subscribe. I also host live streams with informal discussions about nuanced topics, just like this one on Wednesdays at 7:30 p.m. PST. So don't forget to jump in if you're curious or have something you'd like to contribute. If you have any topics you'd like me to discuss in a Wednesday stream or for a video, I have a post on my community page where you can drop your suggestions. I'd love to know what you're curious about. But until then, I'll see you in the next one. Bye!